good to go.
Okay, everybody. Welcome to the Planning Commission meeting for North Ogden City, dated June 17th, 2020. I'm Vice Chairman Mason. I'm standing in for Commissioner Thomas as he has not yet joined. Welcome to the Planning Commission meeting for North Ogden City, dated June 17th, 2020. Terrible echo, if we can fix that. Mason, I'm standing in for Commissioner Thomas as he has not yet joined. Okay, if Commissioner Thomas does join throughout the meeting, I'll be turning over the leading of the meeting to him as he is our chairman. We're going to start as we always do with an invocation by Commissioner Waite, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance by Commissioner Nancarrow. Commissioner Waite.
I better unmute me. Our dear Father in heaven, we're thankful for this opportunity we have to meet and to discuss the needs and opportunities and that are presenting themselves to us at this time and in our great city. We thank Thee for blessing us with government that allows us to participate and have a voice in the way we are governed and how we are regulated. We ask Thee to bless us that we will be guided by Thy hand, that the decisions and discussions that we make will be for the benefit of all, and that any decisions that are made will be a blessing to the residents of this city at this time and for the time to come. We thank Thee for the beauties that surround us and for the opportunity we have to work with people who are good people who want the best for our society. Bless us that we will have discussion that will be beneficial to all and that it will be orderly and civil, and that all will be well and that we will be blessed for this meeting. And we say this in the name of Thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you to you both. Commissioner Waite, I make note that it felt like you were stalling for time to give Commissioner Thomas some extra time. I appreciate that. I shouldn't ever speak of someone's heartfelt prayer, but if it was drawn out in that interest, I'm appreciative of that. Okay, gang. We are going to ask for any ex parte communications or conflicts of interest to disclose for tonight's agenda. Be there any? Now is your time. I know some of you are on. I'm seeing a bunch of nodding head or shaking heads. So note that there are no ex parte communications or conflicts of interest to disclose. It doesn't sound like we have minutes to approve. Is that correct? That's not on our agenda?
That's correct. We do not have minutes. We might want to do the opening statement, though.
I glazed right past that. We are going to hear our opening statement from Mr. Rob Scott.
Thank you, Chair and Planning Commissioners and audience. I'm going to explain the process that the Planning Commission will use in making decisions and the rules that govern the agenda items or hearings. The Planning Commission is interested in receiving public input and treating everyone fairly, that is, both interested parties and applicants. The Planning Commission is governed by Utah state law and the North Ogden City zoning and subdivision regulations. These codes contain criteria that the Planning Commission must follow in making its decisions. Before each agenda item begins, city staff will give a report. The report will identify whether the item is an administrative or legislative item and list the criteria that govern the city's decision. After the staff report, the item will be opened for other speakers. Following the applicant, any other interested persons will be allowed to speak. The applicant has final rebuttal time. Applicants or their agents will be allowed up to 10 minutes for their initial presentation and 5 minutes for rebuttal. Person speaking for a committee and or a board will be given 5 minutes. All other individuals will be entitled 3 minutes. Prior to speaking, anyone who needs more time to present evidence must ask for more time. Any information, argument, or evidence you give must relate to the criteria listed in the staff report or other criteria in the general plan or land use regulations that you believe apply to the decision. Any materials that are referenced or displayed or referenced, for example, pictures or written materials, are part of the record and must be submitted to the commission. Prior to speaking, anyone wishing to speak, they should signify by raising their hand to be recognized and state their name and address. The Planning Commission has adopted rules regarding outside contacts, otherwise known as ex parte communications. Commissioners are not to engage in communications outside of the public meeting regarding administrative applications. If you desire to speak to commissioners on these matters, it should be done at a regular meeting, so your comments, concerns, and evidence are on the public record. And finally, as a courtesy to persons in the meeting, please turn off your cell phones. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Okay, we do have a fairly light agenda this evening. It looks like we have two main items on there. If there are any public comments for items not on our agenda, we'd entertain those now. I'll give just a second pause to allow for any comments. Again, we're looking at this point, we're mostly interested in for comments not pertaining to an agenda item. If your comment does pertain to an agenda item, it would be more appropriate to give it at that point, and we will provide opportunity for that. We have
I don't see hands raised.
Nobody's raising their hand?
Nope.
A little bit. Okay, let's move into our administrative section of our agenda, which is item number 5 on the agenda. If anyone has seen it on our website, consideration and action regarding the site plan approval of improvements to the parking area located approximately 2560 North Washington Boulevard, presented by Brandon Bell. Brandon, the time's yours.
Thank you, Chair Mason. So this is, again, for improvements to the parking area located at the crossroads at North Ogden Shopping Center. And it's at about 2600, well, it's 2550 North Washington Boulevard, approximately. The zoning is overwhelmingly, I think it's CP2. There's a small portion that may go into the C2 zone, but they were applying the same standards here. I think they're all the same standards that are relevant. So the applicant has made, this is their second set of major improvements to the site. In 2016, the site was purchased, and the current owners, who were the new owners, stated that they would be upgrading the shopping center in 2 phases. And again, this is the second phase. The main upgrade on the main portion of the first upgrade was reskinning the building's exterior. And then related to this, the applicant also added an ATM facility, an additional ATM facility on the southern portion of the site, and will be demolishing the existing ATM facility that's just on the northern portion of the site, that's just to the east of the Wells Fargo building. This application is also being applied for in connection with the upcoming improvements to the intersection at 2600 North. The first few zoning ordinances that are applicable address the CP2 zone. In this case, the uses are already in place in this shopping center, and those are not under question as to whether they're being considered for approval or not. This is the main thrust of this is simply an adjustment to parking to better accommodate those existing and approved uses. The site plan shows the location of this project at the north end of the overall site, just south of 2600 North. There's currently a fizz location in the just to the south of the parking area that this is that the changes are being proposed for. Regarding the site development standards, the site development standards, the minimum standards have already been addressed with regards to prior approvals for building height, setbacks, etc. There is a lot coverage requirement of only 80% buildings in hardscape, and that is met in the overall project, and I'll discuss that in more detail as we discuss landscaping below. A site plan is required for this site based on 1126.2, and then we do have an ordinance that's 11.8D2 that addresses scope of projects. The basic idea of this ordinance is that for remodel or renovation or improvements costing less than 50% of the current assessed value, it's recommended that these standards be considered, but they're the whole full set of standards is not necessarily applicable. And then in that same ordinance, a couple paragraphs or provisions below, it gives the Planning Commission, in this case, who's the approval authority, the ability to determine which standards apply in individual circumstances for the same basic reason of if something's already approved and it would be an unreasonable burden to add an additional requirement that would be, say, for instance, in effect with a new project. So staff comment is that given the above ordinance and that this is a renovation of a parking area of an existing shopping center, we've only included those ordinances which we believe are applicable and should be enforced in this specific situation. The intent of the project is to enhance the parking for the shopping center. And the applicant has stated that the value of the work will be far less than 50% of the value of the buildings on site. In fact, she stated in an email specifically that the project is expected to be about 5% of the value of the overall center. The expected cost is about $550,000. So you can see that based on those numbers that this is well within the threshold of allowing there to be modification and customization of which standards are considered applicable. Regarding providing a development plan to the Planning Commission, which is one of our requirements in 1126.7, the submitted site plan shows the northern portions of the crossroads at North Ogden project, and specifically this particular project area. Since the new ATMs have already been approved and the existing ATMs on the north side will be demolished as part of this expansion of 2600 North in Washington, the bank building will remain in place while the ATMs are relocated, and there will not be any drive-up windows at the bank building in the new plan. Regarding the specifics on this proposed site plan, as well as the addition or the upgrade that occurred with the approval of the ATM, the parking stalls will have increased if this is approved to from 207 parking stalls to 261. And then regarding landscaping, the landscape plan for the crossroads at North Ogden complies with the 20% requirement if the city-owned property that is landscaped is included. The city-owned property has landscaping in place and is being maintained by the applicant. And the applicant has stated that the total landscape amount being maintained in the project is 20.4%. And that was the standard that was used in the last project on this site that the city-owned property that was being maintained by the city or maintained by the applicant was included in that percentage. The final issue is that of trash enclosures. We have a pretty specific ordinance that deals with trash enclosures. A few of the standards from that ordinance are that the contents should not be visible from a height of 5 feet above grade from any abutting street or property. Also, the enclosures need to be, are supposed to be of sufficient height to conceal contents. And the minimum height is that in any enclosure, the minimum height is 4 feet above grade. So the gates are required. Gates are also required and should be solid or baffled, equal in height to the enclosure, and equipped with latches to ensure closure when not in use. And then they also have a requirement regarding location that they should not be in any required front or side yard. The main staff comment on this is the location is of the proposed new trash enclosure is not in any required side yard. There currently are 4 trash enclosures, or I don't know. Actually, I don't know about that number. I maybe recall the number of gates, but there's 1 trash enclosure with multiple dumpsters in it on site that's currently to the east of where this is being proposed, near the very east of this site. The trash enclosure is being proposed to be moved from the east side of the drive aisle that goes behind the buildings to the west side of the drive aisle and somewhat north on the site to the north side of the buildings. Staff's main input on this is that we'd recommend that the Planning Commission, we didn't receive a design for a trash enclosure yet, and we'd recommend that the commission, if they decide to approve this project, delegate to the staff the review of the trash enclosure design, with the applicant being permitted to submit a design for the trash enclosures to the staff. The ordinance requires that the trash bins be gated with either a solid or baffled gate, and the gate being equal in height to the enclosure. I would also add that as I've reviewed the ordinance, one issue may be that as they propose that design, that from staff's point of view, that the walls of the enclosure may need to be higher on the north and east side to meet this requirement about not being, the contents not being visible from adjoining properties. And that could be part of staff review if the Planning Commission feels comfortable with that. We have just, in interest of the issue of trash enclosure specifically, we've worked with the applicant on prior projects and had good success in having her submit trash enclosure designs to the staff and having them meet the ordinance. There have been some issues with the existing gates on the existing trash enclosure, but that was prior to, I think, any project that the current applicant worked on for this site. So the recommended conditions of approval for this project are that the Planning Commission delegate to staff the review of the trash enclosure design, with the applicant being allowed to submit a design for those trash enclosures to staff. The trash bins be gated with either a solid or baffled gate, and the gate be equal in height to the enclosure, as well as additional height may be requested to conceal the contents of the trash enclosure. And then also those conditions that are listed in the engineer's report for this. Lynn, I guess I should have had you pull up the exhibit showing the proposed site plan for the northern area of this site. I think it's exhibit B. So if you are able to pull that up, that would be great.
Did you say B as in boy?
Yes.
Okay, what is exhibit D as in dog?
That's an overall site plan from prior meetings. This is just the approval of the north end, which is what is exhibit B as in boy. And exhibit B, I just wanted to give you an overall view of what the site is proposed to look like. To be, see if we can get that sound taken care of. To be very clear, the exact site plan that's being reviewed and considered tonight is exhibit B, the northern area, not exhibit D. I just want to be clear about that. And I appreciate your question about that for that exact purpose. So are there questions that the commission has for me, that anything that's not clear that I can help you out with?
At one point, thought I heard you mention that the bank building would be moved. It doesn't look like that's the case, right? What is being moved there?
Right now, the ATMs are going to be moved, and then and the new ATMs have already been approved, and then the parking's being reconfigured quite significantly to help with traffic flow issues on the site. The applicant can go into greater detail on that if she would like to. And then you probably need to talk to John about or the applicant about the Wells Fargo being moved, but that's not under consideration tonight, but maybe a possibility in the future.
I just have a couple of comments. It's good to hear the parking stalls are going to increase in number because the parking down there is kind of a hectic mess at times. And also trash enclosures. It's good to see they're going to get moved and improved because where they're at right now is pretty ugly. And just those two things I'm glad to see happening.
Agreed. One more question, Brandon, from me. I understand that Exhibit D is broader, more bird's eye view of the overall area. But does what's being proposed build towards what's included in Exhibit D? Meaning, when you look at this, it's a lot of lines and grades and stuff like that, and it's very technical. And when you look at Exhibit D, it's pretty straightforward. Is what is being proposed consistent with in other words, could you take what's being proposed tonight and insert it right into Exhibit D?
From what I could tell, they were the same as far as this specific area. That's the northern parking area. I looked at them pretty closely and I couldn't see any differences. I don't know about southern areas of the site. I'd guess that was all taken care of with the Arby's and Starbucks, but there may be some minor differences in the southern area of the site. But as far as what's being considered tonight, I saw them to be consistent unless I missed something.
Well, there are some differences, and I don't know if that's in the scope of this conversation, but for example, the parking area that's shown to the west of the Ace Hardware doesn't exist, right? It shows it like a kind of a unload or a drop-off zone or something there, which doesn't exist, unless that's what's being constructed down there right now. I don't know that.
That site plan was approved a month or so ago. That was the Wells Fargo ATM just west of the Ace building.
Okay, I must have missed that meeting.
So I had the exact same question as you, Brandon. Well, I actually bank there, and I was like, hey, you guys gonna move over there, wherever? They're like, well, probably not anymore. So I'm just wondering if they have an ATM moved and there's no drive up and we don't know where we're going to move the bank. I mean, why would you put an ATM for Wells Fargo where you can't put a bank beside it? Or is there enough land to move that bank there? Is that the plan? Which I guess would be west of where the ATM would be. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me, but.
Well, my understanding is that they're moving the ATM to provide a better parking flow and to accommodate the widening of 2600 North.
Well, you can't do that without moving the actual bank, though.
The bank branch is not moving.
So
it's going to stay where it's at.
So Commissioner Arner, I work in a financial institution as well, and those two things can operate independently of one another, meaning you don't need the ATM physically attached to the building. Many times they're serviced by an outside company like Wells Fargo, I can't remember the name of the company. But like, where I work, the ATMs we can have just an ATM that we even have a mobile one that we take it to a fair and set it up and it's just an ATM there. And it's convenient for people. So it doesn't really need to be hooked to the building. I kind of commend them for thinking outside the box here to free up some parking space.
Well,
I don't think
that means the bank has no drive anymore, right?
there won't be any drive-up banking though. There won't be a drive-up teller service. There will just be the ATM. think that's what we talked about in the last meeting. The last time we talked about this in a meeting.
Which is their business decision, right? That's nothing that the city, I think. would-
Right. Yeah.
I know in an area like this, a drive up is difficult because the way the cars need to face and the tellers need to interact with the people. So maybe it just didn't make sense for them to have a drive through there anymore. I don't know. I don't want to speculate. Are there further questions for staff? We do have, looks like the applicant is raising her hand and she'll have a chance to address us and we can ask some of those questions to her. Do we have any further questions to staff before we move on?
If I could just be clear that the only thing under consideration is the adjustments to the northern parking area in this. Everything else has been approved. So.
Okay, if there's no further questions for staff, then let's open this up for public comment, beginning with the applicant, who is McKenna Christensen. She has her hand raised. And Lynn, if you could kindly invite her to speak to us.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Can everyone hear me?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I was just raising my hand and I wanted to make sure that you guys don't have any questions for me that might be easier for me to answer, just as far as the building moving or the ATMs or anything that might be more difficult for staff to answer.
Well, maybe tell us what your overall purpose is and why you feel this design is good. I have no specific concerns with it, but tell us sell us on this.
Do we need name and address?
Oh, thanks.
Oh yeah, so my name is McKenna Christensen and my address is 748 West Heritage Park Boulevard in Layton, 84041. So the reason we decided to move the ATM is because when we first got the plans back for the road widening, we saw that where the road would be widened to, it would actually cut through the end of the existing ATM drive up. And so it would make that useless. We can't put anything there. It would just be out in the road. So that's why we're having to demolish it. And we were looking for other places where we could put an ATM and a drive up, since it's preferable for the bank to have a drive up location. But after looking at the site, we tried a bunch of options and nothing was feasible. It wouldn't work with parking. It wouldn't work with traffic. It wouldn't work with egress and ingress. And so we were trying to find a different location to put the ATM, and the only other location we had on site was that west portion. And you guys mentioned on Exhibit D that it's parking with like the ins and outs. So that's where the ATM will be, and that is under construction right now. And it's not preferable for Wells Fargo, but they did approve that, since with the road widening, there's not really any other option.
Thank you. So under your proposal, are you proposing, let's talk just north of the Fizz building, are we going to have an island there or some kind of a barrier that then creates 45-degree parking in a one-way situation? Is that
yes. Yeah, there will be a barrier when you see that 45-degree parking just to the south of that will be a curb right there. And we looked at other possibilities for parking right there, and that was the only type that fit. We tried doing 90-degree, but there just wasn't enough room. So we ended up with the 45-degree parking right there.
What are you gonna do for the flow of the Fizz? Because like right now, I'm just thinking they've got a double lane and it's backed up most of the time all the way back to the actual drive road. And if this goes to single lane, I do see it cuts back south, but how's that going to work?
So we've actually been having some meetings with Fizz regarding this drive-through. And they're comfortable with this plan right now. We know the stacking doesn't look great, but they would rather have the stacking naturally go back behind the building than out into the roadway, because I know the city doesn't like having it go into the roadway. But as you can see, the stacking is kind of looping around the backside of the building, and they're comfortable with the stacking like that. But if you guys have an issue with the stacking like that, we did think of another option. It's not shown on this plan, but if you see that eastbound drive lane right next to the Fizz stacking drive-through, we were thinking we could put in another drive-through lane right there and just have westbound traffic. going from that back drive aisle, but it would be entirely at your guys' approval. So that was the only other option we had thought of right there.
What about the option of opening like 18 more fizzes in North Ogden? That might help the line there.
Yeah.
I personally like this option better than having only a one-way traffic there. I feel like.
Okay, so you'd rather have
Well, I guess I want
the
to.
stacking where it
I don't
wraps.
know how the rest of the commission feels. I'm only one member.
I don't mind it either. I'm just wondering what's going to happen when it backs up beyond the back of the building, because I've seen it back up pretty far.
And just so you guys know, so the stacking is a concern and we don't really have another option to do with it, but Fizz's lease is coming up. I think it's in the start of 2021, their lease is up and we are not looking to renew with Fizz. So that could be a potential solution, that it might only go on for a couple months because we're not looking to renew their lease. We're looking at putting a different tenant in there and finding a different location for them, but that's just another option.
Okay, well, I just encourage the commission. My thought on that is that building does support a drive up, and whether that's a dry cleaner like it used to be, or a Fizz, or whatever, we do want to make sure that it has a adequate room, I think, for traffic and the drive-through, and a safe way to do that.
Yeah, and just so you guys are aware, we don't love this stacking plan either, but our hands are kind of tied because UDOT decided to move. The existing drive aisle is actually further to the west, and UDOT decided to move this drive aisle to line up with 450 East across the street. So our hands are kind of tied with how we can lay this out. So we're trying to find the best options, and if you guys have any suggestions, we'd absolutely be open to that, but our hands are kind of tied.
I guess I just add a comment that it's situations like this where we have an existing tenant and also the majority of the plan in place are the exact reason why we have the clauses that were cited in our ordinance that allow the flexibility to, accommodate situations that have limited ability to adjust.
Yeah, I don't have any real concerns with the stacking. I think probably the biggest thing is going to be retraining all of the people that are coming to Fizz. I can see, this has nothing to do with the applicant and everything to do with the people just totally being confused, trying to figure out how to get in and get their dirty Diet Coke or whatever the heck it is that they're lining up to get. So I'll have to go further down behind the store and loop around, and I can see them trying to wedge themselves in every outlet trying to get over there. So, but that again, that's not that has nothing to do with the applicant, but everything to do with the people who are using the services there.
And just another suggestion, we could even get with Fizz, and once this is completed, we can look into just purchasing some temporary like A-frame signs to put out on the site just to kind of direct traffic so the public can get used to it.
Yeah, I think that would help a lot because I do see people just being totally confused because people don't train easily. And habits are hard to break.
The other place I'd like to see signage is on where you have the 45 degree and we have a one-way through there. I think we need some real strong signage of one way, do not enter, because if we get in a situation where we have two cars in that 45 degree area, okay, they can't get out. The only way for them would be for one of the cars to back out. And both of those entrances are right kitty corner to where you turn in from 2600. And I just would hate to see someone be in reverse coming around there as someone's pulling in, into the parking lot. They're going to hit, I think. So I think we need some strong signage that, this is, I think it's a good design, but people will need to use it correctly and we'll need to help them, or they'll need to be aided by some good signs.
Yeah, I agree.
So, and maybe that's a design, I mean, is the commission okay with that, with having a one-way parking area that's really right between the two entrances to the parking plaza? I think I am, but I do think it's going to take some signage.
I'm okay with it as well, but I know signage won't solve, it'll help, but it won't solve the problem because people still feel like, well, it's a shortcut, we take it real quick. Happens in grocery store parking lots all the time. The signage will solve some of it, but not all of it.
Yeah, but at those busy times, I think it's going to need more than just paint on the asphalt, right? Like, you know how you see the big arrow on the ground? It's going to need more than that. I think we're going to need to have some vertical signage.
I agree with you there. So we can even put in conditions of approval to install some, not just paint, like some actual freestanding signs.
Okay.
I like that.
Anything else for us? Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you for your time, Mrs. Christensen.
Hey, thank you.
Yep. Do we have any other public comments on this?
No, there's no hands up.
For a second, for any hands? Okay. Further discussion by the Planning Commission. One thing that I have always wondered is, I remember approving the site plan for this a long time ago, and approving the landscape plan and seeing the trees come up, or approving new trees, and we saw the trees come down, and we never saw them get replaced by anything. Is this the time when that will happen? What does the landscaping look like there, Brandon?
On the north end, I believe that we've been working with the applicant to add some trees on the south end, I should say. I haven't had much discussion on this. I haven't had any discussion on this area, if that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, I just felt like when those trees left, North Ogden lost a little bit of its charm, that we had there in 2600 with the trees, and they were getting to be mature-ish. And I know one of them was taken out by a pedestrian or by an automobile. I remember that, but I was eagerly awaiting them to come back, and that hasn't happened yet.
Brandon, I remember that discussion as well. Yes, there was a discussion about trees being replaced or added in. And I wondered what's happened to that as well. And if that's going to come forth or it's just kind of been dropped.
Yeah, we approved a landscaping plan that included the trees and the tearing down of those trees. And we saw half of that, but not the other half.
If I could comment on that, as far as the 2600 trees go, those will be installed. We were waiting to install those when we mobilized for our ATM, just to save some costs for us, which we are now mobilized on our ATM. So we will be planting the trees in the park strip along 2600 South, directly in front of the Starbucks and the Arby's, within the next month. And then there was an overall landscape plan. I believe all of you saw it when you approved the ATM about 2 months ago. And there will be a line of trees in the park strip along 2600.
In fact, commissioners, that's part of what's shown on Exhibit D. You can see that the trees and stuff are identified in the plant schedule. And I mean, that's a landscape plan.
Okay, that's good. That's good. That's good. Things are moving along. I felt a little bait and switch there earlier when the trees came down and we didn't get the replacement trees, but it sounds like that's happening. That's good. So, Commission, my thoughts on this, and I'm interested to hear yours, but I think this is an overall good design. I support it. I do like the clause where we could delegate the approval of the trash enclosure to staff, let them work that out, and hopefully we come up with something better than what we have in that spot. But overall, it looks good. I think the concept looks fine. to me. Do you have any agreement or disagreement to that?
I agree.
Okay, in the absence of any real discussion here, I would entertain a motion on this.
All right, I'll make a motion that we approve the adjustment to the site plan for the North Ogden Crossroads Center as identified in the staff report and the engineer's report. And do we want to make a condition of approval of the vertical signs?
I would like to see that myself, as with the
I'd like that.
and with the delegation of the trash enclosures.
Yeah. Oh,
Approval of the trash enclosures to staff, but it's your motion.
I'll include that. That was part of the actual recommended conditions of approval in the staff report. So I didn't state it, but I will add the addition of the vertical signs as a condition of approval.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. We'll gather any further discussion, any amendments to the motion. Okay, let's vote on the motion. Commissioner Waite, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Barker?
Yes.
Commissioner Nancaro?
Yes.
Commissioner Lunt? Commissioner Lunt, it's your motion. How do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Arner?
Yes.
And I vote yes. The motion passes unanimously. Gavel.
Thank
Okay,
you, guys.
thank you. Have a good night. Moving on to our legislative item, our legislative section of our agenda, discussion regarding temporary land use regulation for downtown Southtown syllabus, presented by Rob Scott.
Okay, commissioners. Let's see if I can scroll through these pictures. Is not liking what I'm doing here. Let's see. Are you seeing the Picaroon Timbers picture?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So this last weekend, I had a project to go collect some buck rail fence for some property that we have. And in order to achieve that, I drove up with my brother up to Pinedale, Wyoming. So I've been thinking about how would be the best way to solicit people's thinking regarding what we want to see along Washington Boulevard in terms of the zoning and standards, et cetera. You've seen in the syllabus that there was a request made of their general plan steering committee to start thinking about uses and design standards and what have you. And I'll get to that in just a minute, but I thought it would be helpful. I was looking through our latest Utah chapter newsletter, and there was a little set of information, a little article on the importance of sense of place in our communities. And so I thought I'd share with you a few things relative to what a little town like Pinedale, Wyoming has done. They're just a little over 2,000 people, and they've done some pretty amazing things. So similar to North Ogden, we have Ben Lomond that we look at. Pinedale, they look at the Wind River Mountains. So that's what you see in the distance there. Part of their downtown, for a town that's got 2,000 people, they have a community park that is on their main street. And this is, if you're familiar with Wyoming, there's an annual migration of pronghorn, and that's what these set of sculptures are depicting. And it's along what this is Pine Creek, Pinedale. Gosh, can you imagine that? Beautiful community park that has picnic boweries and picnic benches and so forth on both sides of the creek. So, you know, a little bit of a flavor for that. And then, as a lot of places do, a little bit of a history of Pine Creek. There were some of the first, I won't call them pioneers, explorers, had gone to Oregon, and on their way back, they came back this way. They discovered where Pinedale was. And when they got there, they found some huge teepees that was a burial thing. So it's kind of interesting. And then a little bit of decoration on top of the monument there that depicts some of the history and what have you. So again, Pine Creek. As you walk down the downtown, you see a little interesting bit of art that's just on the sidewalk. And then one of the huge celebrations that they have in Pinedale is that they have a Mountain Man Rendezvous. And it's about a 10-acre site that they have that people come from all over the place to be a part of that. This is just a kind of a representation of this along their main street in the downtown. And then I thought that for a little town, they had one of the nicest entry signs that I've ever seen. If you look on the telephone pole, that red-tailed hawk was screeching at me. I was kind of worried that he was going to come down and do some damage to me, but he didn't. So that was good. So anyway, I just thought by way of introduction, just kind of share with you what one community is doing in terms of their sense of place. So I'm going to call up another outline here. I'm going to, let's see. And let's see, share. So in this article that was written by, I think he's the either Boxelder or he's the Brigham City developer or planner up there. In any case, he wrote about this. There's a couple things that I thought would be helpful as we contemplate what do we want to see along Washington Boulevard. So part of that is looking at the built environment. In other words, what do we have that's there? What are the things that relate to the proportion, the scale, and the massing of the buildings that are along there? And along with that is, okay, we have what we have today. What is it that we want for the future? Another really important part of all of this is our community identity. We have cherry days, remember the cherry on top kind of a thing, but that's a huge part of North Ogden's history, and it's a huge part of the very significant Founders Day and celebration that we have as part of the 4th of July. Also, we have some public spaces and public investment that has taken place along Washington. So we have new streetscape standards. We have the pedestrian lighting, the benches for the bus stops, et cetera. So that's an important part of this. And then we have also the property over there where we have a community gathering place at the Stone, which has, in the general plan, some potential for expansion and what have you. So as we contemplate what are the things that we want to see in these areas along Washington Boulevard, then I'd like to entertain a little bit of a discussion about what are some of the things that the Planning Commission feels are really important. So to do that, we've got the Washington Boulevard area divided into downtown and also the south town. And I just put some summary statements from our general plan talking about those two areas. And also in the other material that was sent to you, there was materials that describe in more detail the information from the general plan itself. So thinking about this, when you think about downtown, here are some of the, as you look through that list, transit and excellent pedestrian connections, variety of stores, residences, offices, wide pedestrian friendly, attractive sidewalks, well-lit streets, variety of restaurants, gathering places, people of all ages. When we think about Southtown, the distinction there was made was our southern gateway, build upon the uniqueness of the cannery building. Some mixed use description is given here, smaller scale for both commercial and multifamily. Buildings should embrace the public realm rather than facing inward. In other words, there should be a focus along the street that when someone identifies a project that it's evident what that project is. And again, streetscape enhancements. So I wanted to just give you a little bit more about some things as we talk about uses. As the staff is working towards coming up with some new standards and a new ordinance along Washington Boulevard, our thinking at this point is that we would identify a specific zone along Washington, but it would have two sub-districts, one that related to downtown and one to Southtown. So we have, and we've described those as community commercial along Washington Boulevard. Other commercial throughout the town would be in its own ordinance. So with that's basically my overview. I'm kind of interested in hearing from the Planning Commission if you have any thoughts about what are some of the unique things about the downtown area versus the Southtown area that you would like us to start thinking about and potentially incorporating into some standards, or it doesn't even have to be standards really. The standards are the ordinance, but there's a whole lot of investment in downtown that goes way beyond that in terms of public investment, in terms of the streetscape and all of those kinds of things. So anyway, I'm interested to get some feedback from you all as to just what are some of the unique things, some of the things that we want to highlight, some of the things that we want to emphasize in those two sub-districts.
I got a couple thoughts. One is that, I support something like this because I think we sure missed the boat with having this in place when the development came just south of the cannery. What we have there is a bunch of condos, which doesn't look unique at all. And our principle there is to build upon the uniqueness of the cannery building, and it abuts in with those condos. And I felt like at the time we had to approve those, but man, I sure didn't want to see condos going in right there and built that way. But but back to what are these principles that we build on? The other day, I meet with a bunch of people on Saturday morning sometimes, and I know I'm a fat guy, but sometimes I go running with this group of people. And the nice thing about North Ogden is you can start up at my house and you can run downhill for like an hour and end up, and you run downhill. So we started up at my house, we ran down, and we met up at Lee's, and we were sitting outside, and socially distancing out there. And the people I run with, they're from Mountain Green and from South Ogden and Roy, and they're people I work with. And they were marveling at just the number of people that kept coming up to the stump and filling up water. And they're like, what is going on here? And I mean, over and over and over. And I said, yeah, you watch it. As long as we sit here, there'll be a steady stream of people going to that stump to get water. And they're like, what is it? I mean, is it different than the water they get out of their tap? And I said, I don't think so, but it's, for whatever reason, it's the thing. And this girl from Roy piped up and she said, I remember coming to North Ogden as a little girl to get water, and we got it out of that stump. And so that the thing I think that about the North Town is that stump. I mean, it's kind of developed around it, sort of, but it really is a point of emphasis. And it's this weird culture that exists in North Ogden that doesn't exist where you go get water, and for whatever reason. So anyway, water features, fresh water, artesian wells, things like that. That's been a thing I remember when I was a kid in North Ogden, and we'd ride our bikes down to the park. We had like 3 different places we could stop, and somebody would have like an artesian well in their front yard that was just some concrete and then a little pipe coming out of it and some water coming. You could get a drink and stuff. And so I think those drinking fountains and the artesian wells are something that we talk about the cherries and the farms and that kind of stuff, but those artesian wells were something that I remember has a little bit of heritage. And anyway, I'll talk enough about that.
I think that spring that's there is actually a big deal to, like you say, a certain culture of people. My sister-in-law had told me when she was coming to visit here, she was like, oh, it's listed on some website where you can just go and see where all these natural springs are to get spring water from. Most of them are out in the wilderness someplace, but ours happens to be right in the middle of the city. So I completely agree with that. I think the other thing that's really becoming a draw part of our, I guess, identity is mountain biking, and these mountain biking trails that are right here along the Bonneville Shoreline Trail. It's like a constant group of people that are coming to this area to use those mountain biking trails now that they've been, I guess, refined a little bit in the last few years.
Think about what all along that bench, right? Through the valley, you've got access to the Bonneville Shoreline Trail, and Ogden City's taken and really made those trailheads nicer, with big signage. Just think about the one right off. I mean, it's almost in North Ogden. As you're going down Mountain Road, there's just a big sign that gives the name of the trail, and it gives people a place to meet. Oh, hey, we're going to meet at such and such. Right now, I have to pretty much give them Google coordinates on where to meet when we meet to go running and stuff. But with some bigger signage and stuff, I think pointing out those trails definitely gives us a sense of place.
Just a thought. I thought we're dealing mainly with downtown North Town and South Town. I like the idea they should be a little bit different. But one thing I noticed, it'd be nice to have places. I realize it's a long-term thing, not a short-term thing. It's just going to have because of the tremendous cost it's going to be to get it all put in place. But there ought to be plazas and where people can eat, with benches and trees, and to take you back to the historic part of North Ogden, the cherry trees, the apple trees, the peach trees, the apricot trees that were there when I was growing up. Okay, they help that, and that can be incorporated into both parts of the town. But yeah, I agree, the commercial part of it should be different. And that's already started to be because of what's going on with the high density housing to the south.
So the other thing about the Southtown too is so you talk about the cannery, but Kurt's is nearly as iconic, if not just as I think of Kurt's before I think of the cannery, to be honest with you.
Yeah, Kirk started out as Pinkies.
Yeah, and but the architecture of the building, it has that real retro vibe. And so I don't know, maybe the vibe for Southtown is, a retro feel. I don't know. I thinking out loud here. I don't have great thoughts on this, but
You know, I think that's a good thought because the South Town, I think, is going to be a different type of commercial appeal rather than the North Town.
But you know, everything built up in the North Town is, you know, when was Smith's put in? Probably 86 or so. You know, is but like the 1980s, because like we've torn down everything that existed there before, the old post office and the you know, Barker's service station and all that, and it's been built up since the 80s. But the South Town, you've got Kurtz, which kind of, I mean, that's not that old, but it represents the 60s, and then the Cannery, which represents, wow, who knows, the 30s, 40s. So it has a little bit unique character with a retro feel. I don't know how you incorporate that into standards or some kind of design, but that's what it is.
Well, don't want to see Kirk's disappear. It's an historical thing.
Yeah. You know, Commissioner Barker, your point about the fruit growing, you know, region and history is a good one, because if I recall, I think you're the one that explained it to me, that there is a direct tie from that to that cannery. Like that's what they used to can there.
My grandfather was the president of that cannery.
Yeah, I remember taking fruit there. And I didn't grow up in North Ogden.
But you know, it's interesting because that Washington can be quite a historical thing if it's done right between South Town and North Town. It could be really quite neat. So also, I mentioned Barker Park, we had plans on that. We have a part there for this history of North Ogden, the plot with plaques and stuff that recognized early settlers, the Indians, that my grandfathers used to camp out on that land. There's a lot of things that can be done to really mark the history of North Ogden along there.
So let's assume, and I agree with Commissioner Nancaro when she said, hey, what's something that makes North Ogden North Ogden? Mountain biking and trails, right? And we know we're talking about them downtown. So what's the overlap of those two things? Well, it's access to those trails, I think. So, you know, what a sense of place would be, hey, you want to go mountain bike up, you know, near Coldwater Canyon, and then ride your bike down and grab an ice cream or whatever, or even get dinner or whatever. I mean, you know, if we were to, and again, that's not going to happen tonight, but if we were to incorporate that better access into the city, you know, that could create a sense of place.
You know, bring that extra point to reading through the agenda or the staff report. It talked about traffic flow. And there on 2700 North, the traffic is overwhelming right now. Where compared to the South Park, there's very little traffic, and trying to even that out. And so it kind of makes it a little easier. And there is access to those biking trails on the South Town if people know how to get to it.
Yeah, but when we're talking about sense of place, right? It's not just
right.
It's not just the physical access. It's what makes it feel like that. Is it a wooden boardwalk that you ride across, right? Or and I don't know. And this stuff's expensive, and there may be no appetite in the city for this. But if you're asking me to just throw stuff on the wall and brainstorm, then I'm thinking, wow, how about an actual like mountain bike or wooden boardwalks that traverse, over certain places and stuff like that. I don't know, like actually embrace the mountain biking and stuff and the access and the transportation that way. That's it seems like a stretch. It seems very hard to see us with wooden boardwalks and things like that in North Ogden, but I'm just throwing stuff on the wall, right? Like the mountain biking in the downtown.
I remember it's been a few years ago when my kids were playing lacrosse. They just started the team. It's a club sport. And when the schools and they wouldn't, because it was a club sport, they wouldn't let them play at the high school. So we were playing at Oaklawn Park. And I'd see people come in from Salt Lake, Bountiful, all of the other schools that were were participating, and they pull into the parking lot in Oaklawn Park, and they get out of their cars and they just stare. And they couldn't believe where they were. They didn't, had a hard time believing that they were that close to any kind of an urban or suburban, urban, I don't know how you want to call it, population center. And they were just shocked. They had no idea that any of this was here. Somehow we've got to get that out, but we also don't want to lose it. And from working on the general plan last time, and then working on the general plan steering committee this time, last time we spent so much time talking about Washington Boulevard that we never talked about the rest of the city. It was like a 1 or 2 week afterthought. And I'm afraid we're going that direction now with this steering committee. We're slowly drifting back. It's like the moth to the campfire. It's so much of the rest of the city also defines, the other areas in the city. The parks that we have define the city. We talk about a sense of place, and Rob, when you talked about, I get them mixed up. It was Pinedale or Big Piney. Anyway, the parks and stuff that are there, our parks are phenomenal, but they're not down on Washington Boulevard. And so, to kind of create that whole vision of where we're at and what we have, I'm not sure how you do that. But, the cannery, Kurtz has some real character. You get up on Main Street or up closer to 2600, and it could be anywhere USA because it all looks like that. And then you go over and you start getting away from Washington Boulevard, and then the character of the city starts popping out again. We need to, I don't know how we tie all of that together, but I think we need to. And it's not just a Washington Boulevard thing.
I think one of the biggest things, I'm fairly new to the city, but one of the most amazing things to me is just the mountain scenery. We are like right at the base of this, gorgeous mountain view. And, I think in some ways, I don't know if that makes us unique to the Wasatch Front, but, I think it's, that's what makes the parks so much more beautiful. It makes the mountain biking, the draw, I guess beyond the history, but those mountains are irreplaceable, really.
Yeah, I think that should be the focus rather than a cannery. Some of the other stuff, the stump is cool. I remember, quite often I'd beg my dad, if we'd gone down to Ogden, come this way and stop and get a drink. And, so that's part of the character of the city, but that doesn't define the city.
I put this in the chat, but given the informal nature of this and that this is a discussion, I'd be interested in anyone that's in attendance that has any thoughts on this as well. So please raise your hand if you do, and we'd love to hear from you. That's pretty much all I have to input.
While you're waiting to see if there's anybody that has additional thoughts, one last thing, and that is when we start talking about uses and how we should differentiate between downtown and the Southtown subdistricts, that's going to be one of the really big decision points for this project. And one of the things that we have in our existing ordinances is we have everything in a comprehensive list. And I use the term comprehensive loosely, but we basically use a list of all zones. What people are going to, other cities are going to, is categories of uses. So instead of listing all the retail uses. You identify a general topic of retail uses. And then what we end up doing is you identify those uses that are not allowed as opposed to those that are allowed. And I think that seems to make a little more sense. We end up with, as part of our business license review efforts, sometimes we end up doing that very thing because we're trying to figure out, gee, this doesn't really fit in the list, but it's close to this. So it just seems to make sense that would be something that we could work towards as part of this project. If you don't have any other things, commissioners, feel free to send me additional comments. I'm going to be working on this and trying to come up with, as you can well imagine, this is not an easy task. And I really appreciate these thoughts that you've shared with me tonight, because I think that they not only address the regulatory side of it, but it also helps out in what the city can be focusing on as far as community investment.
Okay. I wonder if staff has any specific comments on this. And, you know, all this stuff is nice to sometimes write down, and sometimes there's just not a public appetite for it, right? Like we could say, oh, we want statues lining Washington Boulevard, and the city would come back and say, hey, that's a crazy use of funds, and or the residents would, and we're not interested in that. But I'm curious what, you know, anyone in attendance here, if they have input on this and what they'd like to see, and what is our sense of place in North Ogden?
Commissioner Mason, I have a comment.
Please.
In answer to the question about how to distinguish downtown from Southtown, we've had quite a lot of development in the downtown area, and most of that development is what we would say is auto-oriented. The layout and design is made to facilitate and accommodate automobiles primarily, as opposed to pedestrians. And we've talked about trying to make, or I guess the general plan talks about trying to make the downtown be more walkable and pedestrian oriented. But our most recent developments are not necessarily heading in that direction. I think we have more of an opportunity with Southtown to emphasize walkability, and that may be one way to distinguish the two. Even in Southtown area, we have pressure from development to accept auto-oriented development, you know, with the car wash, with the 7-Eleven. I don't think the development trends are necessarily pushing for walkability. But I think the Planning Commission and the City Council have an opportunity to shift in that direction if that's something you would desire. And, you know, one of the main pieces of that would be to push development toward the street and on the sidewalks, and to just design projects in a way that the auto uses are secondary, or I guess more concealed, rather than being the primary driver of the design of the developments. So that's just one thought, is to try to differentiate by producing design in the Southtown that is more suited for pedestrians and less focused on automobiles.
I agree with that. When you got to Southtown, the high density housing projects going in down there, some great opportunity to find a way to have businesses that are geared towards walking, and place for people to stop and enjoy each other, the company, the plazas, whatever. What a great opportunity to prepare for that.
This seems like, though, one of those things that sounds so good on paper when we start talking, but when we got serious about about form-based code for this very purpose, it was met with distaste by the public, and you know, I agree with you, Evan. I think it's I would like to see walkable areas in there, but I just didn't feel like the citizens in North Ogden, at least the ones that were represented, wanted it by and large. And,
so if I could make two comments that I think will tie a few points together. The first is that just, I guess, I wasn't actually intending to bring up the form-based code, but I think that this may be the best way to make the point. One of the things, if we were doing the form-based code over again, at least preparing it, that I would have pushed even harder on. I felt like I tried to do this, but in meetings that I don't think they ended up being public meetings, but they were with Planning Commission doing a charrette. But I would focus on the existing local character of the Southtown area. For instance, we've talked about Kurtz and also the Cannery Center. One of the challenges as a planner is helping the public visualize what it is that you're proposing, and also tying it into the identity of the place that's already existing. And if you can tie concepts to the existing development that already exists, then it makes it easier for the public to be clear and comprehend what you're proposing. And so as you look at the issue of building an identity, I really think that, you know, it's not just coming up with things like, I think the ideas that have been proposed are great about mountain biking and the building on the water, but making sure that we build on the very visually prominent, significant elements of the community that already exist, and expanding and playing on that, for lack of a better term. The second thing that I've had on my mind a lot lately is someone's got to build a lot of the identity at some point. And as we have these visioning discussions and things like that, you know, it's easy to get into an adversarial point of view with regards to developers. I think that's a mistake, because just as another example, even though they didn't come to the meetings, I had probably 4 or 5 developers who expressed significant interest when the form-based code was being prepared to me as staff. And I had 1 or 2 call me after it was not passed and expressed disappointment and calling about the status of it. Well, my point is that if we can find ways to bring developers into our visioning discussions, I think that might be helpful for 2 reasons. First, you're helping shop for the developers that will be interested in building your vision. And second, you're helping bring them along and helping them understand that there's a market for what they may propose in the future, so that they're more likely to figure out how to make their balance sheet work for a project if they sense that the community is really going to support it. And so as we continue with visioning exercises, I think we need to look at bringing the developers in earlier on so that they have more opportunity for buy-in and to tailor their projects so that they're consistent with the vision that's developed for North Ogden, and creates a more collaborative work experience as opposed to adversarial potentially. That's it.
You know, as I watched the Republican gubernatorial debates last night, and I don't even remember who it was, but one of the candidates was supporting taking the existing prison when it relocates, right? The prison's being built out by the airport, taking that area and making it a carless community, right? Meaning it would be all walkable in there. And I just wonder if down the road, when we start seeing that stuff in place, if the appetite will increase in North Ogden. And it would be nice to have policies ready to go for that, right? So we could lead in that area.
Yeah.
Other thoughts, Rob? Does that give you what you want tonight?
Yes, I think this is one of those things where we just need to kind of take it a step at a time, and hopefully come up with things that will be common sense, will be something that furthers the goals and the vision of our general plan, and people can feel like we're moving in the right direction here.
Okay, thank you. Okay, planning commissioners, we come to item 7, which is any remarks you may have about something not on the agenda or anything you want to revisit. Anything? Okay, do we have a report from our city planner?
I think I've covered everything unless Brandon or Lynn can remember something. Oh, John, call. We need to visit with you the potential for some additional joint work sessions. And John, have you got those dates?
Not a firm one yet. The biggest issue we have is that the August joint work session is the truth and taxation hearing, and we're not allowed to have a meeting after that hearing starts. And so we might need to talk to the council about the opportunity of doing a joint work session on something other than the first Tuesday of the month for some of these items.
So we talked about the possibility of having a joint work session in July and one in August. So just give the commission a heads up that we'll try and formulate that as quickly as we can so it can be put on your calendars.
Okay, I'll reiterate what's been said before. We've met the city council on their turf many times on the Tuesday nights, and would encourage them to try to meet us on ours one time and join one of our meetings on a Wednesday, if that happens.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll let John carry the mail on that one.
Happy to pass that along.
Okay, speaking of you, John, do you have any remarks for us as our city manager and attorney?
Nothing, no. I will tell you, and it doesn't relate directly to what you do individually, but the planning department is looking and exploring electronic applications and bringing the department into the technology age, so to speak, although in a lot of ways, a lot of these electronic submitting platforms are still somewhat new for planning because they've, there's always new changes and things going on. So that's one change in the department that we're looking at.
Oh, cool. Yeah, you know what, the whole COVID thing, I did a basement remodel that I had to put a building permit in for, and I finished it in like March, and I haven't, I didn't know if someone would want to come and do an inspection or if we could do it through like FaceTime or whatever, because it's just the final walkthrough. So yeah, that'd be good to see those kind of things. Speaking of which, Lynn, can we talk about that tomorrow?
Yep.
Okay. Come on, I just need someone to come and sign off on it.
Yep, I'll take care of it.
Okay, thanks. Okay, that concludes everything I have. Does anybody, do we have a motion to adjourn or any other comments? I will move that we adjourn.
A second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for an adjournment. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Gavel, meeting's over.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.